All right, I'd like to call to order this meeting, work session for Salem City Council for Tuesday, February 17th, 2026. Will the recorder please call the roll?
Councillor Tegan.
Present.
Councillor Nishioka.
I'm here.
Councillor Matthews.
Here.
Councillor Gwen.
Here.
Councillor Brown.
Present.
Councillor Vang.
Here.
Councillor Nordyke.
Here.
Councillor Varney.
Here.
Mayor Julie Hoy.
Here. All right, please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, Councillor Nishioka.
Yes, I move for approval of the special meeting agenda.
Second.
Motion and a second by Gwen. Anything to your motion? Will the recorder please call the roll?
Councillor Tegan.
Aye.
Councillor Nishioka.
Aye.
Councillor Matthews.
Aye.
Councillor Gwen.
Aye.
Councillor Brown.
Aye.
Councillor Vang.
Aye.
Councillor Nordyke.
Aye.
Councillor Varney.
Aye.
Mayor Julie Hoy.
Aye. On to the additions and deletions to the agenda. Are there any tonight?
I move for an addition to the agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and a second by Gwen. Councillor to the motion.
Yes, there has been a presentation added that we will soon see to this agenda.
Thank you. Any thoughts? Will the recorder please call the roll?
Councillor Nishioka.
Aye.
Councillor Matthews.
Aye.
Councillor Gwen.
Aye.
Councillor Brown.
Aye.
Councillor Vang.
Aye.
Councillor Nordyke. Councillor Varney.
Aye.
Councillor Tegan.
Aye.
Mayor Julie Hoy.
Aye. All right, moving on to discussion of the options for the city operations fee, restructuring, and cost analysis of service expansions.
Good evening. I'm Josh Eggleston, the city's Chief Financial Officer. We're here to talk about the city operations fee restructure, and it is a work session format, so feel free to ask questions as we go through the slides. Just to highlight what we're going to cover this evening, we're going to talk about the background and history of the city operations fee, identified concerns, and confirm with the council that there are still those concerns, restructure challenges, potential options, and then next steps. So a little background in history. Established January 1st, 2020, that's when it was first charged. This was the rate that was first adopted for residential, multifamily, and all the other accounts. Technically, they're adopted separately, but they're set at the same rate. And the multifamily unit was set at 0.8 times the residential account rate. That's why you had that $6.40 at the time. That was the occupancy for a multifamily unit compared to a residential unit, about 0.8 of that total. And then all other accounts were set at 4.82 times the residential account, consistent with the streetlight fee. Yes, Councilor.
I was just wondering if, for the sake of everyone else, could you tell us what the purpose of the operations fee was at that time?
Yeah, so the city operations fee was put into effect to fund city services, and it was part one of a two-part plan. And if you remember what else happened in 2020, we didn't get to that second part. We actually had a payroll tax that was on the ballot, and the council pulled it before there was a vote. Not the most recent effort, but one prior. And I'll just pause here. Any question on the current rate structure? We've maintained that through today with those same proportions, the 0.8 for the multifamily and the 4.82 for other accounts. And I should note, there was a one-time increase in July of 23, again, a part one of a two-part plan.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Mayor. So The 4.82 relation between the residential and the commercial industrial rate, you said it mirrors what was in the streetlight fee, but what was the rationale for it to be in the streetlight fee, if it's known?
Yeah, really good question. That was before my time, so I'm not certain. I think it was that time the council decided on that 4.82 for some combination between the residential rate and the commercial rate. So I don't have that background.
But no documented rationale is what you're saying.
Not that I'm aware of, and I appreciate this conversation to try to get to something more rational. So where we're at today, I just saw someone reach out to us about the rate increasing, and it did go up. So January 1st, it went up to $16.28 for residential accounts, $13.02 for multifamily, and $78.47 for all the other accounts. And that's consistent with the CPI for the 2024 December to December change, 2.52%. And then just to make sure everyone's grounded on the accounts we're talking about, total of just over 47,000 accounts as of 2 weeks ago. There is some ebb and flow as people leave and properties are vacant for a while, or as more units are added. And then I've broken that down by the annual budgeted revenue that's generated by each of the account classifications. And then down there at the bottom in asterisks, you can see the 2,238 multifamily accounts equals over 27,000 actual housing units.
Councillor Matthews?
So on a multifamily account, is it based on per meter then? Is that essentially what it is? So if there's 1 meter for 4 units, then it's one fee on the opposition to if it's not based on per unit?
No, so for multifamily, it's based on the units. That is a data set that we collect and maintain as part of the utility billing system.
Got it.
So if you have 1 meter, 4 units, you're going to get charged for 4 units.
4 units, okay.
So community feedback, both from this body, City Council, the Budget Committee, and then the wider community. On the left there, operations fee fairness. So both rate fairness between residential and non-residential accounts, then also rate fairness within non-residential accounts. So not just a residential single-family dwelling compared to a commercial business, but different levels of commercial businesses also. While we're having this conversation, we want to make sure we keep in mind a continual budget deficit. While our position looks better, we have had continued conversations, and we do expect there to be continuing structural imbalances in our financial forecast. And then also recognizing the need to fund services for a growing Salem. So as we have new residents, new people moving to Salem, we need to add services to service those residents also. And I'll pause here just, especially there on that left box. I just want to confirm that that's the understanding concurrence of the council, that rate fairness exists.
Councillor
Or
Teigen?
doesn't exist, sorry.
Yeah, as the maker of the motion, I suppose in December, I think just to put a finer point on it, I think both of those are, I think, problematic on the face of how the operations fee is currently structured. Though I think if you were to consider the bottom one, the rate fairness within non-residential accounts, so I think there's probably a lot of commercial uses. The corner barber shop probably uses about the same amount of city services or is comparable to a residential unit. And right now, they pay more. But if you compare the sort of basic residential unit versus the largest commercial account, then you have a really big disparity in fairness about which one should be covering a portion of the city's operations fee. So I think they play with one another. There's an interplay between those two boxes as well. It's kind of how I see it.
Councilor Nishioka.
Thank you. When you, so the one that is rate fairness between residential and non-residential accounts, can you help me understand what a non-residential account is?
Yeah, so just going back to this slide, if you see residential accounts,
Okay.
it represents the vast majority, 42,000 accounts compared to just over 3,000 of the commercial, public, industrial, and institutional.
Thank you. I was trying to think people that live here, but now I understand commercial.
And just, recognize where we came from when the city operations fee was implemented. We were using a fairly old utility billing system. So now that we have a new utility billing system that was implemented last year, it's going well. We're able to have some options to look at it a different way. At the time, it was pretty, account classification was one of the only ways we could look at it.
Councilor Teigen.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. Josh, the other thing I just really want to make sure that I'm getting clearly, can you go back to the accounts? Yeah, so now there's 2,238 multifamily accounts, but there's 27,000 housing units. So if someone was, we have 42,000 residential housing units in the city and 27,250 multifamily, like front doors in the city. Is that correct? Is that what that's saying?
So I want to be a little careful just because this is just utility billing data, so the actual housing units might differ, but what we're billing for is 42,000 residential accounts and then approximately 27,000 multifamily units.
Okay. So probably not quite front doors, but close.
Close, yes.
Because that first number, 2,000, I was like, well, wait a second, there's something very wrong here. But that's not what we're saying. There might be 2,238 accounts. They represent more units than that.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And why I want to be careful how we're classifying it as a duplex might be classified in the utility billing system as a single family residential account, whereas for sure, an apartment complex is going to be multifamily. But there is some variation there depending on when you had the meter installed and how you're classified.
Okay.
Councilor Varney.
Thank you. So using your duplex example, then the amount of the operations fee would be for each of the units. So basically, whatever, 12 instead of the 6 or whatever it is. I'm trying to think of where I am here. What were you saying there?
Yeah, so depending on how the duplex is classified in the utility billing system, it either pays for 2 units, the multifamily rate, or 1 unit if it's a residential meter. I'm not exactly clear on how consistent we are with that data set, but definitely the larger multifamily complexes are classified as multifamily. Moving on. So I mentioned the former utility billing system as a constraint. We also have a couple challenges moving forward. One is a property tax limitation. So we can't levy more than those property tax limits in measures 5 and 50. So what we can't do is create a fee based on the value of the property. So some things we have to be careful about are square footage alone. Looks like value of a property. So what we're proposing is something different where it takes into account the use of the property also. The other larger limitation, and I think we've mentioned this quite a few times when we've talked about the city's operations fee restructure, is the limited data set that's available. So we don't have a business license fee. We don't have a business registry. We have some data on property use that we'll talk about here in a little bit, but properties often change uses without the city being aware of that change. It's just one of the limitations as we have this conversation that we have to be aware of. I wanted to mention what other cities do. So a lot of times the fee methodology is based on account classification like ours. It's not super nuanced. The other one that's pretty prevalent is meter size. So if you have a 3/4 inch meter or a 1 inch meter, you get a different rate. Some cities have a flat fee where everything is just the same fee, no account classification, no meter size difference. Trip generation, especially for transportation fees, it's often used. Hillsborough has a long-standing transportation fee, and more recently, Bend implemented a transportation fee. Also, dwelling units, similar to what we've done with multifamily, is often used as a stand-in for allocating a rate.
Thank you. Can you help me understand how the data is collected for trip generation?
Yeah, we'll get into this a little bit more as we go forward. So basically, there's a transportation engineers allocate and they study trip generation by different types of properties and different areas across the country, and they come up with an average of trip generation for each type of property. So if you're a barber shop or a coffee shop versus a retail, mall, it allocates a different trip generation value to each of those properties.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Tigan.
Yeah, and on this slide, I'm curious, it says what other cities do. So when you're classifying Hillsborough or Bend or whatever, they have a operations fee like we have, or when they're going out and doing non-property tax related fee assessment? Like, I think that's the thing where I'm curious what you mean by what other cities do. What do you mean, what are they doing?
So what other cities do with city operations fees, specifically ones on utility bills. Yeah. So very similar to the model we have. For services funded, police, fire, roads, parks, and sidewalks are generally the major ones you see identified. For us, especially with the community services and the local option levy fund, ours is focused on police and fire generally. So I'm going to switch to talk about our potential solution we have. There's a property categorization the city maintains called place type. It's maintained by the city staff and the IT department. It categorizes buildings or properties based on use. It aligns with the regional address database. So when that regional address database was put into place, IT implemented this new place type to try to get to what properties are being used for. It's not always a perfect match because we don't always know when properties are switching, but when there's a development review or a land use action, that's identified and can change that place type. And when we pulled in the place type and matched it with utility accounts, there's about a 90% match for those non-residential accounts, so just over 3,000 accounts. There's a pretty good match for having a place type assigned. And then use activity, trip generation data. It's based on the Institute of Transportation Engineers. So our transportation staff took those ITE designations and assigned them to the place type. So when you have the barber shop or the coffee shop, they've assigned the corresponding ITE designation, ITE use to that place type, which gives us a data set with about a 90% match of place type trip generation data that we could use to approximate the impact on city services with that use activity. I got ahead of myself. That's what we're talking about right here.
Councillor Matthews.
So I guess I'm not quite clear on what the place type would be. So like, let's use the barbershop example. Fade Sessions downtown, great barbershop. if they were to be, what would their place type be? Would it actually say barbershop, or what's it going to say under place type?
So some of them are fairly specific, and it's changed over the years. Sometimes if there's not much difference in the use, it's consolidated. So there used to be lots of different types of general office space, an attorney law office versus an accountant law office. And quite frankly, there's not much difference in city services or use based on those two. So it's been consolidated down. But we have a really good match for that. So that's something we would move forward with ensuring. But yeah, so like a barber shop, I'm not sure what the specific use would be within the place type, but we'd have one assigned.
Okay. And so if let's say a barber shop were to move out of there and suddenly a liquor store were to move in, liquor store is going to likely have more traffic than a barber shop. This is Oregon. And so I'm just trying to figure out, so how do we equate that? Because that didn't go through a land use process or anything else to shift the business type.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. And I have here in a couple slides just some of the next steps with kind of how we go through the administration, building out that data model that's really needed to answer that specific question. Because we don't want to have businesses stuck with a designation that's not correct. We want to have a process for them to go through to get that changed.
Josh, could you please define trip generation?
Yeah, and this is a non-traffic engineer's definition. So basically, if you have a property sitting there, so say we've been talking about a barber shop, say they have 12 people coming there every day, they're generating 12 trips for that business, as opposed to a grocery store that might generate several hundred trips per day.
Thank you. Did I see your hand, Councilor Nordyke?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I would be curious to know, I took a sneak peek at the slides ahead, and I wasn't sure if my question would be addressed, so I wanted to raise it now. Under property place type, I'm assuming that we could make some categorization around, say, state buildings, for example. Would that be a property place type, potentially?
Yeah, government buildings certainly are, yes.
Right. But I noticed we received testimony from our public schools. I think he's the CFO, Paul Odenthal, COO, the Chief Operations Officer, and he made a point of saying that the Salem Kaiser Public Schools is facing some very difficult budget decisions, so they're understandably concerned about how we might recalibrate things. So I'm wondering if this council considers using property place type, being specific in terms of whether a school district building would be treated separately from a state building. And the other reason I want to reiterate something that I had brought up in prior conversations with this council, the state doesn't pay for its usage of our public safety services. It never has adequately compensated us for the millions of dollars that our firefighters, our police officers, and others spend in response to services that are needed, in response to 911 calls. And that includes the heart attack that happens at the Department of Revenue, a call for that, as well as, of course, all the calls for having the privilege of being the state's capital and hosting as many protests, rallies, demonstrations, and so on. As we know, there's millions of dollars in public safety spending that goes along with being in the state capital. So I am still very interested in exploring having state buildings specifically as a place type. They don't change addresses very often, which is good news. I mean, the DHS building is still the DHS building. But I feel that that would be a way that we could get closer to them paying their fair share. So it's something that I hope that we can consider.
If I may, that's certainly a policy question we can address as we move forward.
Councilor Teigen.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it matters for the record, but I also think part of my motivation is not that the state doesn't pay property tax, or that, you know, the hospital doesn't pay property tax, or that really shouldn't be part of our consideration, because this isn't a property tax. It's not based on the value of their property or what they do or don't pay. We've decided as a city that in addition to, in order to sustainably fund our city, we need another revenue source. And so while it's true they don't pay property tax because of the, you know, the way that the state is established, to me, when I think about the operations fee, I think about it as something completely separate and distinct. And I think it's important, as we communicate about it, that we recognize that distinction, because if we don't stick to it, you know, people might come back and say, well, this is just a property tax by another name. And it's not a property tax by another name, it's an operations fee. And so as much as we want to, you know, lean on the fact that the state doesn't pay or the hospital doesn't pay or whoever, to me, that's just not part of the consideration. It's really the fairness about this operations fee.
Thank you, Councillor Tigan. Also, there's legislation still, a ray of hope that we have an ask going for some funding from the state. So that's good. Councillor Varney.
Thank you. And thank you, Councillor Nordyke and Councillor Tigan, for bringing that up. Property tax and this operations fee both go into the same pot of money, though. I mean, it's the general fund. You know, I could see what you said making more sense if maybe if the operations fee was dedicated funding or something. But the fact that they go into the same pot kind of muddies that water. Just wanted to make.
Councillor Tigan.
Yeah, from my perspective, it doesn't. They might go into the same pot, but the motivation for seeking an operations fee is different than a motivation for seeking a property tax. And in order to maintain confidence in the operations fee, especially as we consider its fairness, I think it's really important that we make sure it's not part of the same conversation as a property tax. Because there could be some people who, you know, a year from now don't like the way we decide to address fairness, and the way they come to challenge it is to say, this is a property tax by another name. And I'm telling you today, on our first day talking about this, that it's not. And to me, that's really important, because we need to maintain why we're doing this. It's to address operational deficiencies within our budget through an operations fee.
Councillor Nordyke.
Yeah, I totally second that, Paul. And, you know, I'm mindful of the fact that on our screen, potential option is not just place type, but use activity. And there's plenty you can talk, and as I've already mentioned, the way that state properties is being used ends up using a lot of our services. So to me, it's consistent with options orange and green on our screen right now. So yes, I do see them as quite distinct, but I appreciate you making that distinction abundantly clear, because we will want to be crystal clear about that moving forward. And I am aware that we are yet again going to the legislature to ask for support. We've been going for years, and I'm losing optimism. You know, we've had several local legislators ask for payment in lieu of taxes. We've had legislators ask for a public safety district. We've never been able to deliver on that, so I'm not going to put all my faith in that option this year, especially in a short session where they're still demonstrating an economic forecast that is better than it was a few months ago, but still demonstrating deficit. So I just wanted to respond to all those comments, but thank you, Councillor Tigan, for really making that crystal clear. And I think we can also, as we move forward with this language, there are ways that we can utilize our city attorney's office to make sure we are not crossing any lines inappropriately.
Councillor Matthews.
I think it does bring up a good question that maybe I need clarity on. So, because I mean, I agree, title-wise, these are different than a property tax, but functionally, they go to the same place. They have very similar narratives. They have very similar uses for us. And of course, we're limited in how much property tax we can increase every year. And so, how does this distinctively differentiate itself from a property tax in the way that property tax is calculated and defined versus how we're calculating and defining this?
I'll defer to the city attorney.
Thanks, Dan Atchison, city attorney. So if I understand the question, you're asking how does the operations fee differ from a property tax?
Well, in the way we basically choose how to assess it and the qualifications that are going to be impacting it, how does that differentiate from how
under the current model? It's basically based off of the meter itself and what type of broad category of use, whether it's residential, multifamily residential, commercial, or industrial, and there's no other breakdown than that. A property tax obviously is based off of a lot of different factors related to the specific property and the improvements on it. Did that fully answer your question?
Maybe. I don't know. I think that'll be for the public to decide a little bit on whether it answers the question or not, because I don't know. I think I'm mixed value on it here for the moment, because I think the narrative that we're trying to dispel, to see some linkages there, I guess. And so maybe as we go through this process and we see, maybe once I see the place types, maybe I'll feel different about that. Maybe as we have a very limited global scope right now that we're looking at. And so maybe as I see them, maybe I'll feel it's different. And I'm not saying it is right now. I'm struggling to see the exact, this is the definitive line of what dictates your property tax versus what dictates this, and why these things, such as this place type, don't impact your property values currently, which are going into impacting your property value.
A couple of things. One, the operations fee is intended at least to use different factors as a proxy for impact on city services. So what type of use, how many trips are generated, those sorts of things. That's what we're trying to create metrics for, so we can assess a rate properly. Property tax is really all about valuation, and what creates value for the property. It's the improvements on the property, the square footage, things like that. So it's really different in my mind. It's very different considerations.
My only thought, especially with the trip perspective, is from an analysis perspective on evaluating commercial property, the amount of trips that you actually, cars that pass a business, the amount of actual traffic that business has, that directly impacts its valuation on when a realtor goes to sell it or when the valuation actually goes. And I assume it goes into the property value for the county too, but I may be wrong. So I guess especially on the trip generation one, I would have my biggest concern there, and there being a very direct linkage, but maybe it doesn't go into the county's prospectus.
Councilor Nishioka.
Thank you, Mayor. Going back to page 8, when this was up on the slide, you were talking about the services funded. And in the row, it says police, fire, roads, parks, sidewalks. And you made it clear that the operations fee primarily is for police and fire.
By the nature of what's now funded in the general fund, yes.
Thank you for clarifying that.
All right.
So I'm going to talk about a few future policy questions. I'm calling them future policy questions because we don't expect this to be a one and done process to get your input, go away with something, come back with it fully baked. What we expect is to go away. We'll talk about some next steps here in a second. We'd like feedback on what the next steps look like. But these are identified future policy questions that we're going to need input on eventually, that I've seen questions about. So we want to make sure we address them head on. And this is also where if you have other policy considerations you'd like included in the discussion, that would be helpful here as well, like state properties or the school district input also. So I see this as 3 really fundamental pathways to move forward with how you're building this methodology. We're building the rate. The methodology could be set irregardless of these three avenues. The first is revenue neutral. You're only addressing fairness. So what that means is, if we go really quickly back to other accounts, we're now collecting $2.8 million from those 3,000 accounts. You adjust the methodology for fairness, and you're still collecting that $2.8 million. So what you have is the rate going down for quote unquote smaller accounts and up for larger accounts. The second one is maintain the minimum rate. So that $78 that's currently set as the city operations fee, you could set that as the floor for the rate. So the smaller accounts would pay that rate, and you'd adjust accordingly based on the methodology for the higher rates. And then the third one is revenue generation. So you set the methodology, you set the proportions based on the accounts, and then you say, I need to generate X amount of dollars, and you see where the rate actually is allocated. We don't need an answer tonight, but I do want to note in your staff report, as part of the motion, there was some requests for some costs for services, so we did include those in the staff report. Future Fire Station 12, the Safe, Clean, and Healthy Salem pilots continued, things like that. Fourth person on the ladder companies for the fire department. So when you're thinking about that third category and addressing some of those future service needs for Salem, as well as that budget deficit. And I'm going to really quick just go to next steps, then we'll go back if there's other policy questions, because I want to make sure this could address some things. So the next steps for staff is build the process for the management of the data set. So when I have a conversation with Public Works, with IT, there's lots of voices in this space. So what we want to do is make sure we build a sustainable process for administering this future data set to make sure that it's not an undue administrative burden. If it moves forward, there is going to be some administration, likely some staffing impacts. We're going to need to build out that appeals process. So basically, if the barber shop switches and now it's a computer sales store, how do you change that use? And then also programming needs. So our current utility billing system, while it's able to accept new programming, we still have to work with the vendor to actually have that program implemented. We also see community engagement as a big part of this with all stakeholders. So like the school district would be one of them, state properties, all the different account classifications. And then at that point, we would report back to City Council to work through and finalize that methodology. And then maybe at the same time, maybe separate, an in-depth discussion of funding priorities.
Councilor Nordyke.
Thank you, Josh. I'm thinking creatively at this point, and I'm trying to think of some other entities for whom we don't currently charge an operations fee because they don't have a physical address in Salem. But going back to the use analysis, there are entities that use a fair amount of our public safety services who just don't happen to have a brick and mortar location in Salem. And I don't know, but it feels like now is the time, since your staff is going to start looking at building a process for what data could look like. I feel like now is the time to ask and brainstorm creatively. For example, we have major visiting events that are coming to Salem now. And I'm thinking of major athletic events like the Ironman competition. When Ironman comes into town, they use a tremendous amount of public safety resources. We have police officers blocking up areas to make sure that there's a safe route for the athletes. We've had 911 services delivered to athletes who get injured along the course. But because they don't have a brick and mortar presence in Salem, they don't pay for that. They pay a relatively modest fee to reserve Riverfront Park, but there's no way that that could possibly serve as adequate compensation for all of the overtime that is generated by our police and fire. So I'm wondering, to what extent could we have an operations fee that targets major visiting events? I'm sure there's some events that are so small it wouldn't be worth the cost recovery efforts, but major marquee events that bring in thousands of visitors with considerable public safety expenses. I want to know if it's possible. The other category that I think is off the hook, but still generates public safety needs, are the ride-sharing service providers, like Uber and Lyft, for example. Their drivers are on the road all the time. And so it's inevitable that just by a numbers game that they're going to get into traffic accidents, there's going to be collisions, there's going to be a need for public safety services from all the wear and tear, all the talk about trip generation that is created by ride-sharing service providers, but I don't think they pay a dime. So those are just two entities that come to mind for me that don't pay in based on their use, based on their the number of trips generated, or the other factors that we talked about. And I would like to know, and I don't expect an answer tonight, but I would like to know if it's even possible to add them to the list of accounts.
If I may just briefly, I believe for like the Ironman event, we charge as part of the permit fee. So when they incur overtime for police officers, we charge that back to the event. So they do pay for that. The second example, that's something we can look into. I think there is a license fee, but we can verify and come back. Or the city attorney.
I just wanted to note that, you know, this operations fee is based on utility accounts. So to try to assess the fee against folks who don't have a utility account raises a whole different range of problems.
Thank you, sir. Josh.
So at this point, we'll wait for any questions. If there aren't any questions, what we look for is general concurrence with the thought process. Understand there needs to be refinement, as well as that engagement piece to come back. And I'd look for feedback if there are specific entities or audiences that you think should have engagement.
Councillor Tigan, this was your motion. Are you seeing what you need here? Is there more you'd like to see?
Yeah, thanks, Madam Mayor. Josh, to you and the staff, really appreciate this conversation. I do think that you're right that it's going to take some iteration. I think this is not a one and done type conversation. So in terms of my own motivation for moving it forward, it's not something that's going to solve fiscal year 2027, right? The budget that you're working on today. That's not my expectation. I am curious with the place type, if you've thought about sort of what it looks like in the end, if you have sort of this algorithm of place type and trip data, are you thinking that there's going to be 47,000 different operation fees, like everyone's going to be paying something unique? Or that's my first question. I have a suggestion, but I'm curious how you think it's going to play out.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. So in essence, yes, I think there's going to be an algorithm, and it's going to be based on your place type, as well as part of that trip generation calculation is square footage. So there is going to be some variation with size of property accompanied by that use. So I would see that there'd be not 47,000, but 2,000 different fees being charged based on the use.
Yeah, my thought on that is, I think the public, like as precise as that sounds, it also might be, I don't know, feel too complicated, right? In that it might be more understandable, digestible if the algorithm then put these properties into like one of 5 bands, right? Where you have a very small business, it's like a shop or a barber shop with a toilet, like it's practically like residential use. And then, a slightly larger commercial account, a medium-sized commercial account, a large commercial, and then perhaps like an institutional account. So like that, it really doesn't break up into, indiscernible thousands, but to like 5, that people could understand those bands. And it also might ease the burden on the staff for the appeals. You know, if you're kind of operating a business that's always going to be in band number 2 or band number 1, then you're not going to be facing an appeal for every single one of the, 2,000 designations. Would be my sort of idea and feedback on that. And then I might also consider adding something for types of properties or particular users that are deliver some level of complexity back to the city. So really high usage, lots of trips, lots of police activity or something. I don't know, because I think there's, even among those bands, there might be some users that are just stand out as being much more of a burden on city operations than others. Just some thoughts.
Thank you, Paul. Councillor Tigan. Councillor Barney, go right ahead.
Excuse me. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Councillor Tigan, because my concern is with an algorithm and everything going into a black box and kicking out a certain fee is a real challenge for public transparency. I could see an algorithm assigning the classifications and then there being a certain rate applied to each classification type, but we need to have something that's transparent in terms of that process. And so I agree. As I think about what are we trying to do tonight, I'm thinking of, okay, this algorithm, we're trying to determine which levers to put into this. What will be helpful for me in the future is to, sure, put these levers and these things we come up with into the algorithm, run some scenarios, and then evaluate the pros and cons in terms of impacts on businesses, generated revenue, whether it's progressive, regressive, fairness, equity, certain things. So I'm glad we're having this conversation. I think it's really essential. However, there are a lot of moving parts to it.
Councillor Matthews.
I kind of like Councilor Varney. I think I kind of need to see it to know what I'm really thinking or what I'm really looking at. But I guess one of my concerns is I think we've talked a lot about the other accounts aspect of this, the commercial, public, industrial, institutional. And I'm kind of running the numbers right now, and it seems like they make up about 6.5% of the total accounts and yet make up a little just under 20% of the actual amount that we receive in the total operations fee currently. And so it sort of seems like they're paying a large amount already, and yet most of the focus here is about having that particular line item pay more or pay differently. And so I was kind of looking at the numbers here of like, okay, so let's assume we increased every account in the commercial value by $10. Well, that's still only $375,000 for the year. And how much is it going to actually cost for staff to run this down and chase this down, as far as what is our cost in taking this on versus the actual outcome? I mean, if the juice isn't worth the squeeze. And so I guess that would be the number I would also need back, is like, how much is this really going to take of staff cost? And is it actually worth it?
Councillor Tigan.
Yeah, I mean, this is our time to talk about it. I guess the other thing that Josh asked for feedback on was sort of maintaining a minimum, doing something revenue neutral, or trying to find new revenue for the things that we have coming down the pike. I've thought about this a lot, as people probably know. And I do feel like the kinds of changes that we're talking about are likely to be more complicated than 3, right? We have a pretty simple system, even if it's not fair. And so I personally believe that the right approach is to build a fair system first that's revenue neutral, that doesn't significantly increase the amount of revenue coming into the city first. To Councilor Matthews' point, even if it maintains revenue neutral, that doesn't mean someone isn't paying more. Someone would have to pay more in a revenue neutral system that changed how we were distributing it. But I think working through that system first makes sense in terms of our ongoing conversation with the community about how we're trying to build a sustainable Salem. And then once that system's in place, the kinds of conversations we're having about the next about Fire Station 12 and the kinds of conversations we're having about community policing and things like that, I hope that as those conversations mature, the operations fee is now in a structure that people feel like is fair and can be utilized for that if that's what's decided.
Councilor Matthews.
I think one other thing I also am sitting here trying to determine for myself is what is the X that we're trying to solve for, right? Is it the year 4 and 5 of our 5-year forecast? Is that the X, and that's really the numbers we should be looking to actually achieve? Is it X and Y, where it's solving for the years 4 and 5, but also wanting to fund additional services? I think that's part of also what I'm not clear on, and maybe that'll come clear in the next one of these where we kind of get some of the numbers, but what is the number that this council is trying to solve with the operations fee? And is it just our deficit, or is it deficit plus?
Councilor Vang.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilor Matthews, I think you bring up a good question, and that's something that I've been thinking about tonight as we're going through the discussion of how do we structure our operations fee. And to me, what's important is ensuring that our services that we provide continue to grow as our city is growing. So to me, that means we're looking at our deficit in year 4 and 5, and also our city that's growing beyond that. And so as I'm listening to this discussion, I think for me, the first part is implementing a structure that's fair and transparent and easy for our constituents to understand. And then the next part of the conversation is, okay, how do we ensure that our operations fee grows with our city and continues to be able to fund our police, our fire, and these services that the city provides? So that's kind of my big takeaway, and the feedback I am giving to staff is not only looking at year 4 and 5 and meeting that budget deficit, but how do we make it feasible and sustainable beyond that? Thank you.
Councilor Nishioka.
Thank you, Mayor. And again, everybody's bringing up excellent points. The question that I would also like to see if we could have information back to us is, you were talking earlier how some cities structure their process differently. Some are on trips, some are in other mechanisms. And I'm wondering if there's been any opportunity to study how their decisions have generated what they needed, like take that information, or is it a combination of many things that might be a better way to calculate it instead of just trips? I'm just wondering what kind of data there is already out there that seems to be working.
If I may pose one question back to the council, if that's all right. We talked about a step for community engagement, and my question is, with these policy discussions, are these policy questions you'd like engagement on prior to bringing something back, or do you want staff to go back, prepare something more practical as a scenario for council consideration, and then do community engagement based on that work?
Councilor Matthews.
For me, I think for the community to have any real say, they kind of have to know what they're having to say about. Like, it's the same thing for me, and I think all of us looking at this, it's too conceptual right now to really validate who's impacted even completely. I mean, I'm sitting here thinking about if we went with the trip generation, churches get a lot of trip generation, and yet may not have the kind of income to be able to support a large fee based on that amount of trips that they get. And so I guess, like I say, I think it'd be hard for me to conceptualize because it is right now, and I think it'd be hard for the voter to conceptualize as well.
Sorry, I was just, I'm thinking out loud at this point. So I just want to kind of go step by step, right? The first thing that we need from this council is some kind of a guidance on the methodology so that the staff can go back and do some research on how to build the data set. So that's the first step. So Josh, when it comes to the methodology piece of it, do you feel comfortable that we received enough information from the council, some direction there, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think we have enough to bring back several options.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then so while we are doing that research, or maybe after we do the research, we have an idea about what is possible and what is not, right? And then the community engagement piece. And the community engagement doesn't have to be everything, but my personal opinion on this is the community at least needs to be aware that the council is having these conversations in whatever the format. So I think that's kind of where we are at. Once the council has this discussion about the services and whether it is the revenue neutral and what problem are we trying to solve, there are several policy questions there. Once the council has a conversation and then gives direction to the staff, if there is a community engagement piece missed, it's difficult for this council to have that conversation, right? So I think there is some level of community engagement that has to happen before the council has this conversation. We are also looking at the appetite of what the community is looking for. What is their feedback when it comes to, should we be looking at expanding services? Should we be looking at like that cost neutral model? I think there's several questions that we can ask the community just so that this council can make that decision based on those. I think that the data that we receive from that would be essential for this body to make a decision. So, sorry, I'm just thinking out loud, but that's kind of where I'm at. So I do think that we need to talk about the community engagement before the council has further conversations on it.
May I ask you a question, City Manager?
Sure.
What does that community engagement look like? Is that a town hall or a survey or?
And so that's, I think, was Josh's question, right? Like what level of community engagement we are looking at, and are there interest groups that you would like for us to reach out? So that's this council's, hopefully if you can have some discussion on that, that gives us some direction.
Councilor Nishioka.
Thank you. Thank you for asking those questions, Ms. Dunbury. I think that if I were going to be attending a community discussion session, it would be important for that group to at least have some direction with options. I think if we make it too nebulous, we will have hundreds of other options. And so I do feel that while I understand what you're saying is community feedback before we have maybe more direction, I do feel that when you go to the community, there should be some clear guidelines in that, because it will be overwhelming, the feedback that one gets, and you won't be able to categorize it. So it's like we need to find at least some direction, cost neutral, or options that we've already been hearing in this discussion. because to develop even thought process in that kind of a meeting, you'd have to have opportunities to understand what the direction of the funding is and what options there might be.
And or a survey that goes out with direct questions in order to give you the data that you're looking for in terms of what the community is desiring. Councillor Matthews.
Yeah, I mean, even if what went out as part of the community process wasn't necessarily every archetype plus the actual fee proposal, just at least, I mean, I can speak to if I were, as a business owner, if you came out and spoke to me or spoke to a group that I was part of, my immediate thought would not be, oh, how is this going to impact the city as a whole? My immediate thought's going to be, how is this going to impact me as a whole? And so I'm going to want to know before I support or don't support as a business owner, right? Or offer any type of feedback. What archetype, what subtype am I part of here? And what type of like actual cost could this have on me? And where is that money going to go? And I can almost guarantee the same question that we asked here tonight is, what problem are we solving for is going to be one of the main questions you get, which is, I think, hard for you guys because we haven't given you necessarily that complete direction of are we solving for X or X plus. And so I think that's a challenge. And so, so I'm really wishing you guys luck. I don't know.
So community engagement does not mean that we ask for feedback all the time, right? For me, community engagement is also sharing information with them about this is what your council is having conversations about. So that the next time this council meets to have that conversation about those policy questions, the community feels well informed. That's not the first time they're hearing about it. They have enough information over whatever the time frame to be able to come and participate in those discussions or give a feedback. Otherwise, if we engage them, either just before you have those conversations, they will be lost, right? I think when it comes to being transparent with how the government operates or how we as a city of Salem are operating, my hope is we also continue to engage the community by sharing information so that it's not a surprise to them. So not necessarily a feedback, but let us kind of find those, whether it is neighborhood associations or different stakeholders that we need to engage. To me, when I say engage, communication and community engagement, they go together. So that's what I'm looking at, unless you want to do it differently, right? So I think Josh's question was, which groups do we engage? We have to share this information with them. And so that, they can at least like understand what's happening with this conversation.
Councillor Nordyke.
Thank you so much. So thank you, Krishna, for providing a more nuanced conversation about what it means to do community engagement. I think that part of the process when we're exploring what to do with the operations fee is to make sure that folks understand, what does revenue neutral mean? To me, it can mean multiple things. It could mean that revenue neutral, when I think of it, it could mean that, you're still raising the same amount of money year after year, but raising the same amount of money year after year while our expenses continue to rise above that level means it's not cost neutral over time. So if we're engaging the community, if we ask them, how much are you willing to pay? And sometimes I have this conversation with folks. It's like they want if you want the fastest 911 response time, it's costs extra. If you want sparkling clean parks, that costs more. So how clean do you want to be? How many, how fast of response time do you want for public safety services? How many hours do you want the library? These things aren't free. So I think part of the success of the livability levy was that we were able to communicate with some very skeptical stakeholder groups and John Q. Public that this is exactly what you'll get for your money. You're going to get all the park staff, you're going to get enhanced hours at the library, you're going to get a senior center continuing to stay open. And I think when people were able to see the value of what they were getting, they were more likely to get on board with it. So if we're going to be talking about an operations fee and the future of this fee, I think we should take the best lessons learned from that livability levy conversation with our community and explain to them, this is why we even have an operations fee. This funds our most essential positions in city government. And this is why we're looking at restructuring it. But also, this is an opportunity where we could charge you less, we could charge you the same, we could charge you more. And it's not just how it impacts your wallet, it's how it impacts what you see every time you step outside your door. So I think that however you characterize it in the community, making sure that they see that connection will be helpful in guiding and steering that conversation in a productive way.
I'd just like to ask, because I can't see Councillor Brown, do you have anything to add? Or any
Thanks,
questions?
Madam Mayor. I do not.
Thank you. Councillor Nishioka.
Thank you. So to these points, on page 4 of 5 of the staff report, it's giving us expansion of the Safe, Clean Salem opportunities, the pilot program, once we know how effective that is, the anticipated costs, expanding it to other areas is $5.5 million. Adding the ladder trucks staffing is another little over $2 million, but that's not including the increasing of their salaries in cost of living. I mean, we don't include that, so that would have an escalator. And then we have another 4.5, or basically another $5 million for future staffing, again, without that cost expansion or cost increases. And so we could take these kind of numbers, focusing in on clean, safe, healthy Salem, and also having the fire station and the ladder trucks needed, and use this as the example as far as what the funding what we're looking for. Is that what we're sort of thinking? Because this is in the staff report, so I want to understand if that's what you're aiming for.
If I may, just really briefly. So that's included because it was part of the motion. We'd really like to tee that up, what that funding priority, what you're solving for X plus Y or whatever it might be, for a future discussion. Right now, we really want to focus on just the city operations fee.
Councillor Tigan.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. And just to that point, I mean, I think I included that in the motion as perhaps a bit of a grounding for the conversation, because when I'm talking to members of the community about the way to solve what we know to be a structural problem within the city, these are the sort of things that people talk about. Mm-hmm. But we've also talked about different solutions that have come and gone. And, you know, I think one of the things that's kind of sitting in the back of my mind from our 5-year forecast with the budget committee is we got a preview that we're getting 2 closed urban renewal areas. Those dollars are coming into the budget this year. I think $4.5 million. Is that about right, Josh? 5 years ago, we thought that $4.5 million was going to get us something. But what it's getting us is the exact same service level we have. It's, you know, maybe we had imagined at some point that a closed URA was going to lead to an expansion of services, but it's not. It's just going to help us get to next year. And so as even these things that are identified in the staff report are, to be honest, aspirational. Like the thing that an adjustment to the operations fee might do is help us balance the budget in 2029 without any additional services to the community. Like, that's a reality we have to face as a council. We might not like increasing it, we might not like differentiating it and making it larger for some people, but we also know that we can't go below our staffing levels for our police and fire, and this might be one of the few levers that we have the ability to pull just to maintain the services we have. So that's a bit of a downer, but I think it also, I think it should help us calibrate why we're having the conversation, is that there's not a lot of other places to go. But we know that the need is going to persist.
Councillor Matthews.
Well, I think you're completely right. There aren't a lot of places to go. I do think it's unfortunate because looking at this, we're always hindering the same people every single time. I mean, for instance, we've increased, kind of our agreement with the community was when this was brought on in 2020 that we were only going to increase it by the CPI amount every year. But in contrast to that, we've more than doubled it over that time. And so had we done it by just the CPI amount, we would have kept our contract with the community. But instead, in 2023, we increased it by 61%. And so it's always, I admit there are very few levers, but it also seems a little unjust that it's always the same community that we're going to, the same people. And yeah, it's just, I think we see it from a residential standpoint. And I think most people on this stage, as well as most people at home, understand that it rolls downhill, right? If you increase it on the business, you're still going to increase it on the consumer in the end. And so even as we talk today about increasing on these commercial and industrial properties, in the end, it will still be a tax or a fee that ends up rolling down to the consumer. And so, yeah, it's unfortunate in that regard, I guess.
Councillor Tigan, thank you for that comment. It is aspirational. When we look at the list and the dollar amount that is attached to it, it is aspirational. What's important is, and this is the one thing that I feel like I'm repeating myself again, but I think the way to get through this, when I'm looking at the 5-year forecast, we have to manage our expenses. That's the number one thing. The other piece of it is also, as we are trying these pilot programs, I think it's important that before we ask the community to pay for more, or whether it is cost neutrality, whatever that is, before we ask for more money from this community, we need to show the community what we can do with that dollar amount. That is one of the reasons why these pilot programs become are impactful. And so one is like managing those expenses. Number two is keep trying these pilot programs at a very small scale so that the community gets to have a preview of what it could be if they have to spend more money on this. And again, I don't think the goal here is to ask this community to pay more so that we can continue to fix the deficit. I know the deficit exists. We need communities' help to be able to have that proper 5-year forecast. But our part is also to manage expenses. Continue to try those pilot programs. And then see if the community is willing to pay more to continue those pilot programs on an ongoing basis. So there are several things that we have to keep working at in order to manage that for the next 5 years.
Councillor Varney.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, City Manager Namburi, for bringing that up. That's really crucial. I think about these added expenses we've taken on, and they've been in response to requests from members of the public that want it safer, cleaner, et cetera, but there's a cost to that. if I look at just continuing our pilot programs for the Safe, Clean, Healthy Salem, I mean, that's 5.5 million, those two combined with the expansion. I mean, that kind of negates the whole urban renewal area fund coming in. I think about this back on the city survey too. The highest priorities were addressing homelessness and of course public safety. And then I look at our budget for police and fire, which takes the majority of our general fund. And correct me if I'm wrong, but when I think about the percentages, the proportion of the general fund that public safety takes up, that overall keeps increasing too. I seem to remember it as it being 53, 54 or something, and now it's closer to 60% of the general fund, but I could be incorrect. But that's another piece of it too. Not only is it take the biggest chunk, but to me, it seems that, and maybe as part of the response to the community, is that's also a piece that keeps growing in proportion to the other rest of it. Just wanted to make the comment.
I have a question that I'm not quite sure how to ask. But when we had this conversation originally, there was talk about just the fairness, the equity issue of making sure that a small business is paying what's relative to the size of their business as opposed to a giant corporation with a lot of, I assume trips are people coming to work throughout the day, 24 hours perhaps. How do we find equity in that? And are we still talking about that?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. So small business is defined lots of different ways depending who you ask. I think what we would be looking for is a consistent methodology where a quote unquote small business is charged a fair rate as opposed to a much, much larger corporation, larger business. I think we've also looked at it in the past, and it's something we could look at is if you're headquartered in Salem, maybe your rate's a little different. That could be a policy consideration. But as far as highlighting small businesses, that looks more like a business tax or a business, based on revenue, which is really challenging to administer, not something I think we should look at. But as far as the size, the use, yes, that's absolutely correct, that we could look at a smaller business differently than a larger business.
And we are talking about the operations fee, not a tax.
Correct, yes.
Mm-hmm. Councillor Gwynn?
I was just curious, on an operations fee, if we do, as we're restructuring that, has there been any consideration given to specify what those dollars are for? Like initially when the operations fee went into effect, it was said, we're using this for public safety, but then when people question, where does that money go, it goes into the general fund, so there's really no way to track that. I just pulled up an article from KGW that was a week ago, actually on February 12th, and it gives a list of Oregon cities that have utility fees. There's 35 of them, ranging from $2 to, and ours is one of the highest, $2 to $79 a month. Of the 35, sorry, I just counted a minute ago. 15 of them say they're for public safety. Some say they're for a transportation utility fee. But almost without fail, they specify what those dollars are being used for. And I believe that we'll get a lot farther with our community if we can explain to them what that money is actually being used for, and we're not just dumping it all into the general fund.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. That could certainly be a policy consideration. So other restricted revenues, for police, that's deposited directly into the police department, which is part of the general fund. The city operations fee, just like property taxes and franchise fees, are deposited into the non-departmental cost center. So I want to make sure everyone knows it is clear, it's transparent, we know exactly where it's going, there's no black holes, but it's not dedicated to a specific service. You are correct.
Councillor Matthews?
You mentioned the headquartered basically option as a possibility. I think when this does come back, I'd be interested to see at least that as part of the proposal, or part of the options at least.
Councillor Tigan.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, I want to thank you for bringing up the idea of the largest of the large, I think is part of the fairness question, and I think it's something we do hear from the public a lot. And, you know, to the idea that I threw out in terms of, you know, putting out, you know, 4 or 5 bands, that last highest band is really about that institutional user who someone like an Amazon, their operation is immense in its place, and then it also extends beyond, you know, that place, and I think everyone knows it. And so I want to, as part of our fairness, be fair to them as well, but also acknowledge that it's a different type of there's different types of businesses operating in the city at all time, and I think the conversation today has really reflected that.
Councillor Varney.
Thank you, Mayor. I was thinking back to when we were talking about community engagement and thinking about not the best, but another way to be able to do that. I'm more of a visual learner, and so I just wanted to ask, remember when we were having the budget conversations, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, and there was the tool online where you could do the different levers where you could increase rates and do things. Was that somewhat successful? Did you get feedback on it? Because to me, that would be a tool that might be useful to help communicate what's going on, where you could input maybe additional things you wanted or keep everything the same and then do some different things with the operations fee. I don't know. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, so it's called Balancing Act by Polco, and it certainly could be an option, yes.
Anyone else? Councillor Nordyke.
No, I just want to say I really appreciate your comments, Mayor Hoy, on the distinction between our small businesses, Councillor Tigan's reference to the barber shop. You know, the barber shop may have a handful of dedicated clientele and a very small footprint in terms of number of people who come in per day. I think of a lot of the small businesses in the city of Salem that have 1 employee, 1 owner, and I'm not interested in putting them in the same category with employers who have 500 employees at any given time or more. I think that there's a major difference for sure. And I also am intrigued at the notion of distinguishing those who are headquartered here in Salem and those who are not. Again, I think I'm hearing Josh loud and clear on let's not make it so difficult that it's a nightmare to administer. But anyway, I just wanted to just echo and underline that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I would just add, and in light of all the news recently, let's not make it harder to do business in Salem, too. So, Councillor Nishioka.
And to that point, I also don't want to discourage businesses that want to come in and bring potentially opportunities for a lot of jobs to be unhappy that they're going to be having an additional fee. So it's like finding that happy balance that it doesn't seem too bad, because I do want to encourage businesses that can bring in high-income earners.
I think just in addition, I think the narrative matters, how we tell the story about what is happening and why it's happening and why we're talking about it in the interest of equity. Yeah.
Councillor Gwynn, thank you for that question about the operations fee and how we were communicating with the community and when we were implementing that. I think some of the department heads, and I was one of them, and Courtney was also there, we were going to different neighborhood association meetings, and it was communicated as this operations fee is going to be for police services and other things, right? And I think as we are engaging with the community, what might be helpful is to ask the community about if these are dedicated funds, how does that change the opinion of the community, right? Should we be kind of talking about, should any kind of an increase we need to be very clear about where that money is going to go, right? So that's something that we should be able to get information back from the community, or as we are doing that initial engagement, as we are communicating. That is, I do think that's a good question. Like, does it change how people view this fee?
Councillor Matthews.
I want to kind of piggyback off of what Councilor Nishioka had said, which is, the intent is not to discourage businesses, large businesses as well, from coming here. I mean, I think Amazon employs somewhere around 1,000 people in our community. And so, they're a big part of the infrastructure that makes everything run, and this actual taxes we get back in property taxes as a whole, not just from them, but from the people they employ. And so, while I don't think that whatever we do here with the city operations fee is going to have Amazon turning tail and running for the hills, I highly doubt financially that would be the case. I do think it's important to also recognize Oregon, and I think most of us have recognized this in some regard, and we've heard about it, that Oregon is not traditionally known as a super business-friendly state. It's not an easy state to do business in. And I think and this is a larger conversation than necessarily the city operations fee, but I keep hearing from corporations and from anyone even looking at possibly coming to Salem, Oregon as a whole is just such a hard place to do business, and there's kind of the death by 1,000 fees. And so we're just looking at implementing another one, which I understand the importance of. But I think it'd be interesting at some point in time for us to look at how can Salem be a bit of a light in Oregon from a business perspective as far as attracting industry in some way. And whether that be opening up land, whether that be looking at whatever options there might be, because I'm not versed in the options, but at some point in the future, I think, especially as we're looking more and more at business fees and business taxes and different things like that, it'd be interesting to have some reprieve of like, okay, here's why it's attractive to come specifically to Salem, even in a state that's not that attractive for business.
Thank you, Councillor Matthews. Well said. Anyone else? Councillor Nordyke.
No, I just want to say I appreciate what you're saying, Councillor Matthews, because I've been reading quite a bit about that myself and hearing that from a variety of businesses in the area. So yeah, I think that we need to be very thoughtful about where and when we make decisions that impact businesses who are considering coming here as well. Thank you.
Well, Josh, do you feel like you have enough to move forward with here?
I think so, yes.
Good.
I appreciate the robust discussion.
You did a fabulous job. Thank you for your preparedness and your team. We get a long way when we do such good work. Thanks so much. If there is nothing else, anyone, we are adjourned.